Good morning, Member Frazier. Let's do a camera and mic check if we can, please.
Morning.
I can hear you and I can see you. Excellent.
All right.
Thank you. Good morning, Member Brown. Welcome. Let's see if we can do a mic and camera check, please. Member Brown? All right. Member Brown, let's try a mic and camera check if we can, please.
There, was that for me? This is Member Clifford. You broke up for a second, but looks like my mic's working now.
Yeah, you're in good shape. I was looking for Member Brown. It looks like you might be having a little trouble, but I can both see and hear you, Member Clifford, so we're all set. Thank you.
Anyone hear me?
Is that you, Member Brown? Jeremy?
Yeah, it is.
Perfect. I can hear you. I can't see you.
Dr. Brown.
Perfect. I can, there you are. Perfect. Thank you.
You see me?
I sure can.
Okay. How are you doing today?
I'm well, thank you. Thank you so much for being here. We'll get started shortly, but let's see if Member Jeremy Brown, if we can see your face. At least we can hear you.
I have a question. Can I ask?
Certainly.
Question. When I look at the, the agenda and for social equity, are we allowed to submit like bullets and, once you kind of transcribe what we had discussed in terms of talking points and suggestions, can we then submit bullets? Because the way it reads, it doesn't look professional, to be honest, and it just kind of, it's like some run-on sentences. Are we allowed to do that? Like submit to you those things, but in a more concise format?
I'm going to defer to someone on the DCC staff on that. Member Payan, welcome. Let's do a camera and mic check, please.
Good morning.
I can hear you.
Wonderful. Thank you.
How about camera, Member Payan? There you are. Perfect. Thank you. Wait.
Hi, this is Angela McIntyre, Abbott, counsel for the department. We can take that issue regarding formatting and how we present the motion offline.
So I can call and ask about this outside of this forum?
Yeah, Jacqueline Campion can discuss that with you offline.
Okay.
Member Shockley, let's do a mic and camera check, please. Member Shockley, are you there?
I'm here.
Great, thank you. Member Christensen, welcome. Let's do a camera and mic check, please.
Hi, good morning.
Good morning. There you are. And Member De La Rosa, when you have a moment, let's test your camera and microphone, please. Vice Chair Nevedal, we do have a quorum, so if you would like to get started, we can certainly do so.
That would be great. Thank you. So good morning, everyone. This is Vice Chair Nevedal. Chair Tamalian was unable to attend this meeting today, so I'll be running the meeting. So I'd like to call to order the June 8th meeting of the Cannabis Advisory Committee. Moderator, would you please call the roll?
Certainly. Member Bauer? Member Brenand? Dr. Brown?
Present.
Member Jeremy Brown? Member Christensen?
Present?
Member Clifford?
Present.
Member De La Rosa?
Present.
Member Frazier?
Present.
Member Iwamoto?
Present.
Member Mathe? Member Payen?
Present.
Member Shockley?
Present.
Member Tupy?
Present.
Member Woolsey?
Present.
And Vice Chair Nevedal?
Present. Okay.
That shows 12. Perfect.
Okay, fabulous. Thank you so much. So a quorum has been established, which then lets us move on to agenda item number 2. So this will be general public comment for items not on today's agenda. Commenters, I would like to remind you that any comments for items that are posted for today's agenda that will be coming up later in today's meeting should be held until that time that we present that item. So again, we're going to be moving on to general public comment for items not on today's agenda. Moderator, would you please open public comment?
Certainly, we are now taking public comment on agenda item number 2. The topic for this public comment period is displayed on the slide, so please keep comments limited to items not on the agenda, which is agenda item number 2. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name if you have logged onto the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you've called in to the meeting. You will have 2 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning. When your time is up, you will be muted, and we will move on to the next request for comment. And remember that each member of the public will have 1 opportunity to speak on each agenda item. And with no further ado, I will send Jeff Pollard. I've just sent you a request to unmute. Oh, he dropped off. There he is. Jeff Pollard, I've sent you a request to unmute. So Vice Chair Nevedal, I'm not seeing any other requests. Not seeing any other requests for public comment.
Okay, well, if there are no requests for public comment for items not on today's agenda, then I think we can go ahead and move right into agenda item number 3, which is the Equity Subcommittee. Will be providing us with updates and a presentation of recommendations. Member Shockley, I'd like to hand the floor over to you. The floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. The Equity Subcommittee met in late April to further discuss the challenges facing equity businesses and to refine the types of data collection that we're asking from the DCC. So the elements that were the main focus of the discussion included that we wanted to refine what data should be collected on businesses. And this data would include the ethnicity of business owners, the veteran status, the gender identity, personal savings and resources used to get the business started. Have they been the victim of a crime in the past? Were they arrested or convicted themselves, or had a close family member that was arrested or convicted for a cannabis crime? The level of education of the business owner, how was the capital raised that they used to start the business, and what was the level of equity in the company that they had to give up in exchange for that capital raise. So those are some of the information points that we're asking the DCC to collect on all businesses. And then the committee discussed possible recommendations for the state definition of equity. But ultimately, we decided to continue the discussion at the next subcommittee meeting. So the subcommittee passed 2 motions in our April meeting. And one was to recommend that the full advisory committee recommend that the DCC collect data about all owners, defined as those who have 10% or more interest in a cannabis license. And that includes the list of data points that I just went over. And then also we wanted information about how difficult it was to find compliant real estate and how many properties did they have to pursue before securing one. And then the other recommendation that that we'd like the full advisory committee to recommend to the DCC is to assess the retail shelf space devoted to social equity brands. And with that, I'm happy to answer any of the questions from the committee members about these 2 recommendations.
So this is Member Neville. Committee members, please feel free to chime in and ask questions or offer your thoughts or ideas about these two recommendations from the Equity Subcommittee. You can use the raise hand feature, which is an icon located at the bottom of your screen, or you can just unmute and request a moment to participate in the discussion.
Hi.
Cathay?
Yeah, great. Thank you. Member Shockley, thank you for this informative update and thank you for your work on the Equity Subcommittee. I have two questions / comments. One is that I would love to understand a little bit more of kind of the background and motivation for these motions, exactly kind of more of, I could think of some reasons why it would be helpful to collect this data, but if you could articulate what the discussion in the subcommittee was motivating collecting this data, that would be helpful to understand.
Sure.
And then maybe, should I say the second
Yeah, go
question
ahead.
now? Okay. And then my second comment is just a concern about data privacy. The information that you're proposing to collect, some of it is quite sensitive, of course. And in particular, I worry that collecting data on arrests and convictions and related data could cause unintended concerns or distress, that information might be misused or used to exclude owners from opportunities or resources. And so I can see clearly why it would be important to collect that information, but I would just want to make sure that it's collected in a thoughtful way and that it's stored in a protective way so that, if DCC were to collect this information, it wouldn't be used in inappropriate ways. So maybe that's something that could be
Sure.
considered for addition to the recommendation.
Totally understand. Just a little background on where these recommendations came from. So in our committee, one of the primary things that we wanted to focus on this year is data collection, particularly to assess the industry as a whole so that we can look at any disproportionalities between general licenses and social equity licenses. And so we thought that these were all data points that would be helpful in creating a full assessment of the differences in these businesses, and then how we can close those gaps in those differences. So that was the purpose of doing that. I'm not sure, what information the DCC keeps private and what it makes public. But I imagine there's certain information that just by law, if collected, would be made public. But I know there's other information that is held privately. So I'll leave that to the DCC to decide, what things fall in those different categories. But the intent was to get the information needed to be able to come up with a thorough assessment that really paints a clear picture of what businesses are facing.
That's great. Thank you.
Can I just add to that? This is Dr. Brown.
Please, Dr. B.
As a regulator, we already ask for arrest and conviction at the local level in order to qualify as a social equity applicant. So all the jurisdictions across the state are asking for that data already. And so that's already happening. Not like this is some new data that we're asking. Jurisdictions are already asking that to qualify for to be an equity applicant.
But for example, information on personal savings and whether they've been the victim of a crime, those would be new data points. Is that correct?
I think so. Yeah, those would be new data points. And to add to Member Shockley, impetus here is to just get an accurate ecosystem of what this industry looks like. We want to get a real time picture of the industry, a more holistic picture of the industry as a whole. And that was the impetus of us recommending that the state collect this type of data.
Well, I really appreciate the background. This is Vice Chair Neville. And so the background I find very helpful. I was just trying to look up the definition of owner, and I'm curious if the 10% is the threshold for ownership as defined in statute, or if it's a different threshold for ownership for the purpose of collecting data. Mhm. Or perhaps how 10% was landed at.
So I'm actually not sure how that's defined in state law. Maybe the DCC can speak on that, but it was the threshold we thought appropriate based on, sometimes there's owners that have a much smaller percentage and it may not be as relevant for somebody who has a fraction of a percentage of ownership, but we thought it was more relevant for anybody above 10%. And that was part of the discussion we had as a committee.
Hi, this is Angela McIntyre, counsel for the department. I just wanted to confirm that the statute indicates that ownership is defined as a person with an aggregate ownership of 20% or more in the person applying for a license or licensee. That 20% is reiterated in the department's regulations for clarity.
Okay, thank you so much. That's helpful as well. And then I think there's also financial interest. So I think that this would, if adopted, require a kind of additional information be collected from both owners and persons with financial interest, is what it sounds like. Just for clarity's sake, I don't know that I have an opinion either way, to be honest with you. But 10% is what members of the committee heard as and decided was an appropriate level for data collection. Member Shockley, do you want to discuss both of these at the same time, or would you like to keep them split apart and complete discussing the first item? I have a question about the second item, which is why I ask.
I'll leave that up to you. I'm fine with that.
Okay. We've got a little echo from you, Member Shockley. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Sorry about that.
On.
I started on my cell phone. I'm trying to get over to my computer. If the moderator's able to bring the other Madison Shockley up, I can switch. Sorry about that.
It's fine now. It seems to come and go, but
yeah, but every time I turn my mic back on, it's going to turn my speaker back on, which is going to be sorry.
Gotcha. It's okay. So the DCC assessed the retail shelf space devoted to social equity brands. I'm just wondering if you had a conversation about how this information would be gathered. Would it be by having the DCC survey social equity brands or retail locations, or perhaps both? And was there any kind of discussion about, kind of how this would be assessed, and if there's maybe a priority to assess based on checking in with the equity brands or perhaps retailers?
So the idea was to assess all businesses so that equity businesses could be compared to the rest of the industry rather than just assess equity businesses.
So assess, say, all retail space, all retail facilities to try to get an idea of what equity brands they have on the shelves versus what non-equity brands they have on the shelves.
I would say all, well, in regards to shelf space in particular, I guess that would specifically be to retailers. But in general, the idea is to get data across all license types.
And I guess I'm just curious, like, do retailers know, and I have no idea, like, is there a way for them to know specifically that a brand they're working with is certified equity eligible or not?
Is there a centralized way to know? I'm not sure.
Okay.
But I think generally, when dispensaries bring products in and they deal with their vendors, yeah, generally they'll know if it's an equity. There's not a whole lot of equity brands on shelves, so it's not really that hard to figure out for a business operator generally.
Right, but with equity cultivators who don't have like a brand, or equity manufacturers that don't necessarily have a brand, they're providing services, they might be on the shelf under multiple names. I'm just curious if this.
I think the concept is more about what equity brands are on those shelves rather than what product within any other company's jar is a equity flower originating from an equity flower cultivator. That the point was really about finding out what percentage of shelf space is devoted to equity brands specifically.
I don't think that would be difficult to find out. I mean, they just ask. Survey to Member Shockley's point, dispensaries know who they're buying from and if they're an equity applicant or not, or an equity licensee or not. They know that.
Okay. Do members have any other questions, discussion regarding
Yeah,
either of these recommendations? Yes, please.
this is Robin Christensen. I have a question actually back to the first. I'm curious about whether there was any discussion around these being optional or required to be collected. And just thinking through some of the concerns that Member Mathe raised around privacy, where some people may be inclined to share this information and others would not. It's a pretty standard practice with public health data collection, which is my area of expertise, is we would give folks an opportunity to opt out of answering questions that may be helpful but not necessarily required for us to accomplish our goals if those questions could potentially cause stress, trauma, or privacy concerns for the individual or business. And then my second point was in the discussion of adding on gender identity, was there any consideration around sexual orientation? And I'm wondering whether that it may already be being collected, but generally I would see those two things clustered together. And I just wanted to make it as a proposed addition there potentially.
There wasn't any specific reason for not including that. I would support including that. Maybe have just been an oversight. Um, yeah, and then what was the first part of your question? I'm sorry, you were saying about have we talked about the privacy issues? I would say just in general, in regards to legalities around these and actual how it would be carried out, we're kind of leaving that more to the DCC to configure and worry about all the legalities. We were just discussing the intent of how we would make an assessment that was complete, and what data points did we feel were necessary for a complete assessment, and make that recommendation to the DCC to figure out legally and practically like how they do that. But we didn't want to get into the weeds of all that at the time.
Maybe a recommendation would be to add to the front of that statement something along the lines of to the extent possible under the legal and regulatory frameworks of DCC shall collect data about all owners, et cetera, et cetera.
I'm not opposed to adding that, but I also think it's kind of a given. I don't think that our recommendations are creating any law that DCC then has to follow, right? So they're gonna do it under the laws that they're able to do it under anyways. I'm not opposed to adding it, but I just don't want to get into a whole bunch of stuff that we don't necessarily have to dive into. I definitely would support adding um, sexual orientation as well, though.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you. I see a couple hands raised. Member Brown?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just curious if there's been any surveys already conducted on existing equity applicants or equity owners as far as getting data points on, level of satisfaction of going through that.
Wait, you cut out, Member Brown.
Oh, shoot. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, I think you're back.
Hello? Okay.
Hello? Yes.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's been any surveys already conducted on existing equity applicants to see what their concerns have been, as far as being in the equity process, if they feel like it's been helpful, or if it's been, I've heard a lot of public comment that did not feel that the equity process, especially in urban areas, was actually providing the intention behind it, for the applicant owners. And I'm just curious if any survey has already been conducted on equity applicants at all.
Local jurisdictions are supposed to, on an annual basis, survey their applicants if they have an equity program and their equity eligible participants. It doesn't include this level of data collection, but that is coming through the through GoBiz, who's issuing those equity funds. So I guess that leads me to this question. This would probably be more specific to folks who had used the equity licensee components with DCC, or would this potentially have DCC surveying also the individuals participating in local equity programs? I guess I'm sorry to kind of jump the line, but Member Brown's question made me kind of think of these pieces where we have, the equity program in GoBiz and then the equity licensing program in DCC.
Yeah, thank you for adding that, Vice Chair. And I think I've responded to a survey or two over the last couple of years as an equity applicant asking about how smooth or not smooth the process was. But as Member Nevedal said, it doesn't go into the specificity like some of these data points would. And then, like I mentioned, we want to ask these questions of the entire industry, not just social equity specifically. And often there's been discussions about different policies, whether they're necessary or what kind of policies would make the impact that we're looking for. And there's often a lack of data to support going one way or another. And so we wanted to get enough data that would paint the picture to allow us to advocate for or against different policies so that we can have better outcomes.
Great. Member Jeremy Brown, you still have the floor if you have additional questions or points to add to the conversation.
Not necessarily, but like you mentioned, the difference between the GoBiz and the DCC's equity avenues. I guess it would be interesting to see if it was possible to get any data from GoBiz relating to their surveys of equity processes. And even just to know, I don't know if it's already out there, but to know the total number of equity applicant, equity businesses versus the total number, that would be interesting.
All right, thank you. We've got a couple hands up. It looks like Member De La Rosa would like to comment, followed by Member Dr. Imani Brown. So Member De La Rosa?
Hi, I just thought I would give some, you had asked about like, do retailers really know who are social equity? Is that something that people give out at the beginning of their conversations when they're trying to get on a shelf? And I just wanted to share a recent story like this week. We manufacture a lot of social equity brands as well as bigger brands in the state of California. And we had a multi-dispensary retailer, so somebody who has more than 5 retail shops in California, call us and was like, hey, we really would like to sort of fatten up our social equity shelf. Can you bring us together? Do you have a group of products that you can bring to us for us to sample and see like if we can bring them on? And so on Monday, we did take a big box of all of the brands that we manufacture for, with their permission, of course, to give to this multi-dispensary operator specifically for social equity brands. And so although I don't think that there's anything like that identifies them currently, I do feel that we're seeing dispensaries really looking to see if because some of those brands are like, nobody else has stuff like that. Like they're just really front facing and very much interesting products that they're trying to look for, outside of gummies and stuff like that. So I think that there is a want for it in the industry, even though we may not have a formal way of doing that just yet. But this was the second larger group of dispensaries. We had another group in SoCal that asked for the same thing. And so I think that it's really awesome if we had retail shelf space devoted to social equity brands, because I think that people want them. They just don't know how to get them. And they just happen to know me and know that we do a lot of these social equity brands in NorCal. So I think it would be good.
Okay, thank you for that. It looks like next we're going to go to member Dr. Imani Brown.
Thank you. I just wanted to add on and perhaps answer a question that member Jeremy Brown asked. GoBiz does ask demographic data like gender and race and income level and some educational level, but they don't ask some of the other granular things that we are asking for here. As I said, just in terms of getting a more holistic snapshot of what the industry really looks like here in California. I think that's our goal. We want to see what the industry looks like, not just, social equity in a vacuum, social equity, but we want to look at the whole industry. And then we can kind of compare apples to apples. That was the impetus of us suggesting that the DCC collect this data across the board.
Okay, thank you for that insight. Appreciate that. I still have some hands raised from members who have already participated in the conversation. I don't know if member Jeremy Brown or member De La Rosa wanted to add to the conversation, but please feel free to do so. And I don't know if there's any additional members who would like to participate in the conversation. We will need to go to public comment and hear from the public regarding both of these recommendations before we could consider moving them forward. So any additional comment on these items before we consider going to public comment on these recommendations? Okay, member De La Rosa, would you be so kind as to lower your hand, please? Thank you very much. I won't get confused. Going back to member Shockley, did you want to add anything, member Shockley, before we go to public comment on these items?
Not necessarily, other than before we go to a vote, I'd like to add sexual orientation to the first one, but that's about it.
Okay, so I think that that would have to be a formal motion to add it. So you can just say I'm making a formal motion to add sexual orientation to the first recommendation, and then we can look for a second.
Sure. Yes, I'd like to make a motion to add sexual orientation to the first point.
I second that motion.
Thank you, Dr. Imani Brown. Okay, so we have a motion and a second to amend the first recommendation for consideration. And I think we can still go to public comment with that motion open. And I don't know if there's any additional considerations or discussion to be had about either of these recommendations before we go to public comment. Okay, hearing none. Moderator, would you please open public comment on the Equity Subcommittee recommendations with the caveat that there is a motion to add social, sexual orientation, to the first recommendation. Could we please go to public comment?
Absolutely. All right, we are now taking public comment on agenda item number 3. If you would like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name if you have logged into the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you've called into the meeting. You will have 2 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and when your time is up, you will be muted and we will move on to the next request for comment. Please remember, each member of the public will have 1 opportunity to speak on each agenda item. And with no further ado, Judy Strang, I just sent you a request to unmute. All right, we'll move on to Emily Porter. Emily Porter. All right, let's try Jason Sharouche. Okay.
Moderator, are we sure the call-in's working? Because we haven't had a single public comment today.
No, it is. So Emily Porter, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
This time. Thanks for the opportunity to contribute. I love these ideas coming from the Equity Subcommittee. I did just want to voice one concern regarding, and maybe we can just discuss a little more information about how this is going to be handled, but requesting information on how funding was raised. Let's be honest, in this industry, if you don't have partners who have outside industry money, it might be coming from an unlawful source, let's say. So that's one thing that I would hope to see handled a little gracefully, is that we do want to encourage people to come out of the darkness into the light, get licensed, bringing themselves into this program. My concern would just be about how we're going to manage that information. If we're asking people specifically about how they raise capital, I mean, what if someone says, I just hustled for the last 30 years, it's a little challenging. So I kind of want to see a little more discussion about how that could be managed in a way that didn't feel invasive. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Sharouche, just sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, sorry, the first time I didn't give the prompt to unmute, but thank you so much for this opportunity to speak. I was just calling to express my support for the motion as amended. And yeah, thank you so much for collecting this important information.
Thank you. Ross Gordon, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Gordon, I'm the policy chair with Origins Council. We represent cannabis businesses in the rural legacy producing regions of California, predominantly small producers. Really appreciate all the work that the Equity Subcommittee has put into this discussion over the past couple of months. Generally support the recommendations, really agree with the importance of collecting data on equity programs, both in terms of how equity programs are being successful or unsuccessful, so that we really understand what the consequences of these programs are and can work to improve them. And also, as sort of a related but separate issue, in terms of understanding who's in equity programs and understanding the historical patterns of law enforcement activity throughout California and which communities were impacted and the different ways in which they were impacted. So really support that sort of approach. Do want to suggest, I think one thing that we've really put forward consistently when it comes to tracking the impacts of the war on drugs is the importance from our perspective of also including considerations, not just of arrests and convictions, but also detentions, seizures, and raids. Definitely in the regions we represent in rural areas, the way in which the war on drugs was executed was largely in terms of raids of folks' homesteads. And these are the impacts that tend to be most top of mind for a lot of our members in rural areas. So I'd hope there's some consideration to maybe including those data points as well. Also, do
30
understand.
seconds.
the concerns around privacy. And so don't have a specific recommendation, but just think that's a good thing to keep in mind generally with all of these data points. And then finally, I'm not sure if it's the present motion, but just appreciate the shelf space consideration as well. Think that's so critical. Folks can be licensed, but are they actually getting shelf space, and are consumers having access to those brands? Thank you.
Thank you. Judy Strang, you have been, there you go.
I'm trying since public comment, non-agenda public comment, to raise my hand. Just FYI, raising your hand next to your name doesn't work. You have to do the Shift Control R to get your hand to go up. And you don't use the unmute button below the directions. You wait until you see the directions you must put up. Just trying to help the conversation. One of the issues we have going on in our community is violence against what seems to be primarily equity-owned businesses. And I saw that, and I was looking for the language again, I saw that there was some information about violence. I'm just wondering if it's just something that is unique that we're experiencing. It is information that needs to be captured. And I'm just wondering if it really is important information that needs to be asked.
Thank you. Lillian Grace, I've sent you a request to unmute. There you go.
And just ask a couple of data points, be considerate for inclusion. As far as the equity subcommittee is considered, I would like for you to actually include a performance module of the intake of, I don't know what they're called, the people who, I guess the companies that participate in the equity programs, that they have a performance model, or at least a performance reporting module that gives them the opportunity to give feedback on the participants and vice versa. I don't think all of those relationships are being documented in a way that reflects what they're learning under the equity program versus what they've actually comprehended under the equity program. Those data points are inclusive of how long they participated, what they participated in, because there's a lot involved before you get to the shelf space part of that I guess that collaboration. But I would like for the data points to be considered, or at least a consideration for additional data points on the performance of the equity participant, as well as the incubator that they go under, should that be a process that's viable or for consideration. The other part is, in the data points measure, is some type of performance ratio as far as the learning capacity of the licensed, what am I calling them?
30 seconds.
That I'll conclude at that point. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Mike Snell, I've just sent you a request to unmute. Mike Snell.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Now I can, yes, now I can hear you.
Hi, yes. I wanted to piggyback on the focus on adding a data point on actual performance of equity businesses. In addition to some sort of tax, I guess, whether it's temporary, a 2-year, 5-year exemption on local tax for equity businesses. Just because we're looking at development of businesses, and in this current climate, it kind of makes it difficult as money in circulation kind of becomes more constrained. So how are we going to survive through, how are we going to survive through these conditions without some sort of relief at a local level that can be adjusted? And so if we can add that as a focus, as an agenda objective, And then also for, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I'll conclude there for now.
Thank you. P. Walker, 323. I've sent you a request to unmute. P. Walker, 323. Oh, there you go.
Trying to figure out the unmute there. Thank you. I am coming in new, so excuse me if I am uninformed, but I just wanted to clarify that under this item, does it qualify as an equity business if only one person, it says defined as those with 10% or more ownership interest. So if only one person is the equity partner with 10%, does that qualify as an equity business? If the other 90% are not distinguished as equity partners?
Commenter, we cannot respond to your questions during the public comment period or during the meeting, but please, if you have additional comments, we would love to hear them.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Margro Advisors. Margro Advisors. I've sent you a request to unmute.
Advisors. Generally, any DCC data collection is available with a public information request. And collecting this data could be a significant concern related to gender identity and orientation because of the very organized, extreme hate group backlash that we're seeing against these groups. Now, I hope members saw that what happened in Glendale yesterday, which is in Los Angeles County, one of the most diverse counties in this country. And I don't believe that making this information mandatory and potentially putting these individuals and their businesses at risk is a benefit to social equity. Now, this can be avoided if the information is collected by an independent third party that allows results to be provided to the DCC anonymously. I also believe that this should still be voluntary, as it could be considered by these individuals as a violation of their personal privacy if it is made mandatory. So this is really important consideration, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you. John Brower, I've sent you a request to unmute. Go ahead.
I share some of the previous commenters' concerns regarding privacy and the source of income to launch businesses as this program is transitioning from the previous traditional and Prop 215 markets to the regulated. There are privacy concerns there. And also, I think further discussion is warranted on the distinction between ownership and financial interest holders. We should try to stay consistent with the language in statute and previous regulations regarding that. But overall, I'm supportive of the general direction here, and look forward to more conversation and improving this program. Thank you.
Thank you. Right, anyone else wanting to comment on agenda item number 3? Ray. Oops. All right, last call for commenting on agenda item number 3. Vice Chair Nevedal, it looks like we are done with public comment. Would you like me to close public comment?
Yes, please.
Wait.
Well, Ray's
There's
there
someone-
and then he's not.
Yeah. Ray, if you would like to make public comment. All right.
Okay.
All right. Public comment is now closed for agenda item number 3. Ooh, wait. All right. Renee, we do have an opportunity if you have public comment that you can submit that online.
Okay. So I think we should go ahead and close public comment. I apologize. Looks like Ray might have a comment, but it flashes on and off so quickly. I don't think there's been a chance to try to call on him. So let's go ahead and close public comment if we may. And I'd like to go back to Member Shockley to lead this conversation as we move forward.
Sure. Thank you all from the public who have made comments on this agenda item. I did hear that there was a comment about including detentions, seizures, and raids specifically. And I think that would be important to add. If we added that to the motion, would it require a new motion that requires us to go back to discussion and then public comment?
I don't think so. I think you could ask for an amendment to the first item to include additional data sets. And then we can look to see if, I believe, member Dr. Imani Brown had seconded the friendly amendment. Perhaps you'd be willing to second a friendly amendment to expand the data sets again.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I would like to make an amendment to the
Hi,
motion.
this is Angela McIntyre, Abbott, counsel for the department. Just a point of clarification, right now the motion on the table is to make an amendment to the first recommendation. We do not currently have a motion on the table to approve either of the recommendations at this point in time.
Okay.
So then would we, if there was a desire to do a second amendment to the first motion, would we have to vote on the amendment, the first amendment, pass that, and then come back for a second amendment to the first recommendation?
The board has the option of amending their motion to approve the recommendations with the friendly amendments that you've been discussing. And that would be one means of addressing everything in one motion.
So Member Shockley, does that make sense to you, or do we have more questions about how to facilitate a second friendly amendment?
I'm a little lost, but I want to do. I know the goal is to do it all in one. I don't know if that means that we can make another friendly amendment or motion.
So you really have the discretion to do it either way. You can make the motion to make the friendly amendments, vote on those amendments, and then make a motion to approve the recommendations with the amendments incorporated. So, or you can do them all in one motion. It's really up to you.
Okay, so it sounds to me like
Chair, I'll leave it to you to.
okay. So I believe you can make a recommendation. You can ask for a friendly amendment to the motion that includes the additional data sets you'd like to see in recommendation number 1. Right?
So I'll do that now. Then I'll ask for a friendly motion to add these data sets specifically about detention, seizures, and raids that folks have experienced. Can I get a second on that friendly motion?
I second that for the friendly amendment.
Thank you.
Okay, great. So I am not tracking, well, let me say it this way. I don't believe we have a motion on the floor to adopt both of these recommendations.
Okay.
Was the previous motion considered a recommendation to adopt the first? I mean, a motion to adopt the first recommendation? I apologize, we're a little.
So the current motion on the table was to make an amendment to the first recommendation, not to approve it at this point.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so effectively, I just added to that, and then so we need to vote on whether we're adding these two to the motion, and then we can have a motion to approve overall.
Yes, the committee can hold a vote on this motion that's currently on the table.
Okay.
Excuse me, this is Member Brown. Is it possible to keep these two friendly amendments separate? The sexual orientation versus the seizures and raids, separate voting items?
I guess if it's a choice, we could.
What's the difference?
I guess if somebody wants to vote affirmative on one but negative on the other.
Yeah, I mean, for me personally, I don't understand why we want to know people's sexual orientation and acknowledge the concerns that a couple people raised, but I'm in support of the other amendment. So I don't want to get blocked out of supporting one because I don't support the other.
Sure. Okay. So then that would just require a third friendly amendment. Right. So
I think those are just two. Those are two amendments, not three. It's two, and he wants it separate. He wants the sexual orientation to be one, and then the performance. I mean, in terms of detention, seizures, and raids as another, and then vote on them separately. If I'm
Thank you.
understanding correctly.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. I'm fine with that. Shall we go ahead with the vote on the first, which is the
Can we formally make those motions if we're entertaining them separately? Thank you.
Sure. I'd like to make a motion to amend one motion to amend the sexual orientation. And to add sexual orientation to this recommendation.
Seconded.
And then I'll make a second motion
So
to
I think you're on the right track, Member Shockley, but I think we should probably vote
on this.
first recommendation because we can't necessarily, I don't think, have two motions on the floor at the same time.
Sure. Well, let's do that.
And just as a point of clarification for staff, was it Dr. Brown who seconded?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so we are going to take a vote on adding a friendly amendment to add the data point of sexual orientation to bullet point number 1. Is that correct?
Yes, that is
okay. All right, and we have a second from Dr. Brown. So Member Jeremy Brown. Yes or
no?
Nay, okay.
I'm sorry, this is Member Clifford. Before we vote, I'm sorry. Can I just ask a quick question? Is this voluntary? I assume that it's voluntary. I mean, I can't imagine we can require people somehow to give their sexual orientation, right?
I mean, I think that's worth discussing. And when we talked about that earlier, Member Shockley said that that was one of the things that they were leaving up to DCC, as well as like how the information would be collected and stored and all of those things that really get into the privacy concerns that have been elevated here.
So just to clarify, what is the concern? Is the concern that we would be recommending to the DCC something that violates privacy and that the DCC may effectuate something that violates people's privacy?
Well, yeah, not that maybe effectuate. I understand that they're bound by laws and they won't do something that's not legal. I just think it's probably a bad look for us to recommend something that's a violation of people's privacy. But I take your point that they're not, you know.
Well, I don't think we're recommending that that the DCC is required. We're just recommending that we'd like for this data to be collected. We're not recommending that the DCC violate any laws in the process of that. So
if I could be sure it was a voluntary thing, I guess I'd feel better about voting for it. I'll just leave it there.
There's nothing in the statement that says that it would be mandatory.
Exactly.
And I
Fair enough.
wanna
Thank
make
you
sure-
for, yeah.
I want to make sure that before we go forward, Member Woolsey has an opportunity to have the floor. I did notice that your hand was raised and maybe your questions were answered, but Member Woolsey?
Yeah, they were more or less answered. My concern would be that the recommendation be that the DCC collect this data as a condition of licensing, and I would not support that kind of mandatory collection of data points. But if it's the recommendation is that they try to collect these data points so that information is available for those who want to participate in the collection of this data, I would support that. I do have the same concerns as I think it was Member Clifford as far as privacy on the particular questions that are asked, and I'm curious how those sexual orientation in particular, how those affect or impact equity programs throughout the state. Are there equity programs that benefit members of that community? If there are not, then I'm not sure how the collection of that data helps, unless the point is to try to encourage equity programs to help people in different communities.
Can I hop in? I just want to
Yeah,
add on to this.
absolutely.
Like all of this is really important to talk about, but if we're going to think about whether sexual orientation should be included, which is a really valuable discussion, I think the other question is, do we want to also consider revisiting gender identity within this recommendation? Because gender identity is also something that is incredibly personal and potentially private to an individual. If you do not fall into a cisgender category of traditional born male can still identify as male, traditional born female still identify as female, then you are putting yourself also at risk for some of the same concerns that have been elevated around sexual orientation. So if we're talking about sex, that's a different conversation than if we're talking about gender identity, which has a much broader meaning and has potential for harm and potential discrimination if that information is made public.
Well,
Oh, goodness.
I think the point of this is to get voluntary information and to get it and to have some way of receiving this information. The point isn't to require this information from people in the for them in exchange to get their license. We haven't gone into how this information be collected in this recommendation. It's just about the desire for each of these data points to be collected. So I feel like we're getting caught up in the weeds on, we're kind of putting the cart before the horse, or, we're not really considering whether people would be required or whether this information would then be made public and those sorts of things. And I guess is the concern that we want to consider those before we make this recommendation, because that's not really the goal of this recommendation. It's really just these are data points that we think would be useful and helpful if they were to come forward, and then let the DCC figure out what is legal, what is the best way to do that, and accomplish that, so we can get an assessment that allows people who, many of whom I think would volunteer and want this information to be put in some sort of data set that can be evaluated for policy to help all these different people affected by these different
Sure.
things.
If the intent is to ask the question, ask a question about each of these data points, I'm fine with asking the question, as long as it's well understood that the participation is voluntary and not a condition of licensing.
Same. Thanks for that.
Okay. Any additional questions or comments from committee members before we proceed with this vote to modify recommendation number 1? Okay, thank you. Moderator, would you please continue with the vote on this on the friendly amendment to this recommendation?
Certainly. So we have Amani Brown as the second. We have Member Jeremy Brown as a nay. Member Christensen?
Come back to me.
Certainly. Member Clifford,
Aye.
Member De La Rosa, Member De La Rosa, Member Frazier,
Aye.
was that an aye?
Yes.
Okay, perfect, thank you. Member Iwamoto,
Aye.
Member Mathe,
Aye.
Member Payan,
Aye.
Member Shockley,
Aye.
Member Tupy,
Aye.
Member Woolsey,
Aye.
and Vice Chair Nevedall.
Aye.
So looks like the motion passes. We
And
have,
moderator, did you want to go back to Member Christensen?
oh yes, excuse me. Yes, Member Christensen.
Yeah, aye.
All right, perfect. So the member or the motion passes.
Right, and then we need to make another motion. I'll make another motion to for a friendly amendment to the recommendation that would add seizure and what was the third one?
Seizures, detentions, and raids.
And raids to the recommendation. Do
Do we have a second?
I will second that friendly amendment, if I may. This is Member Nevedall.
All right.
Thank you.
Let's go down to Imani Brown,
Yes, aye.
Jeremy Brown,
Aye.
Member Christensen,
Aye.
Member Clifford,
Aye.
Member De La Rosa, Member Frazier,
Aye.
Member Iwamoto,
Aye.
Member Mathe,
Aye.
Member Payan,
Aye.
Member Shockley,
Aye.
Member Tupy,
Aye.
and Member Woolsey.
Aye.
All right, and that motion passes.
Okay, great, thank you. So we have two recommendations. The first, which has been gently amended twice. But I believe now we have to consider passing these recommendations as the full committee, and we could take them as a single motion or individual motions. I'm not sure.
I'd like to offer them as a single motion in the interest of time.
Okay, I will second your motion to approve the recommendations, including the amendments brought forward by the Equity Subcommittee.
Yes, and I'll just formally say I'd like to make a motion for this recommendation as amended.
You want to do just the first one, Member Shockley?
Oh, I'm sorry. This motion as amended and this recommendation as amended and the second one, which is that the DCC assess the retail shelf space devoted to social equity brands.
Great, thank you for the clarification. I second your motion.
Thank you.
And so any discussion from committee members before we go to a vote on these two recommendations from the Equity Subcommittee? Okay, doesn't look like we have any desire for further discussion. Moderator, would you please call the vote on these two recommendations or on the motion as a whole?
All right, Dr. Brown,
Aye.
Jeremy Brown,
Aye.
Member Christensen,
Aye.
Member Clifford,
This is Jeremy
Aye.
Brown. I got an aye. Sorry, my mic.
I caught it. It sounded like you were in a canyon, but we got it. Thank you.
Member Clifford, aye, yeah.
Member Clifford,
Aye.
Member De La Rosa,
Aye.
Member Frazier,
Aye.
Member Iramoto,
Aye.
Member Mathe,
Aye.
Member Payan,
Aye.
Member Shockley,
Aye.
Member Tupy,
Aye.
and Member Woolsey.
Aye.
All right. Motion passes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for that. Do we need to consider a short bio break perhaps before going into the next item, or is staff and our members happy to proceed to agenda item 4? Just wanna.
Looks like our staff is, yes, a break would be great.
And so is there a time recommendation on that break? 5 minutes, 10 minutes?
5 minutes. I think
5 minutes, okay. So we'll be returning at 11:18. Is that?
How about 11:20?
That sounds great. Let's take a brief break and come back at 11:20. Thank you.
Vice Chair Nevedall, it's 11:20. Is everybody back?
I'm back. Do we want to do a quick show of hands from members so we can count who's back?
I actually think we need to do this for the record.
Okay.
I think I have to call roll. So, all right, everybody, we're set. Dr. Amani Brown,
Present.
Jeremy Brown, Member Christensen,
Here.
Member Clifford,
I'm here.
Member De La Rosa,
Present.
Member Frazier,
Here.
Member Iwamoto,
Here.
Member Mathey, Member Payen,
Present.
Member Shockley,
Here.
Member Tupy,
Present.
Member Woolsey, I saw you,
Yeah, present. Thank you.
and Member Jeremy Brown. All right, so we're just missing Jeremy Brown, but we still have quorum.
Okay, great. So why don't we go ahead and call the meeting back to order and proceed with agenda item number 4, which is a presentation of recommendations provided by the laboratory subcommittee. And with that said, I'll turn the floor over to Member Frazier to provide us with an update on the laboratory subcommittee.
Thank you for that. I just want to be clear on process. Am I free to discuss each 4 of the recommendations, have committee comment, public comment, and then formally suggest which ones that we decide to move forward with?
Yes.
Okay, so let's do it that way. So what I'll do here, everyone can see them on their screen and having the agenda, but I'll try to describe the intent of them as well, since everyone wasn't in the technical, analytical discussions. And I know as a lab, a lot of this stuff sounds foreign. So I'm going to try to explain what the intent was so we can get comment from the other verticals or other experienced operators on this committee regarding to how it may impact them. So first up, one of the things that is troubling in our current sector is that category 1 pesticides fail based upon detection limits. So a lot of operators experience this and understand what I'm talking about, but between lab to lab, there's actually a different failure limit for category 1 pesticides. So since we can't formally change the rule, we're at least trying to decrease the variance between lab to lab by making each lab approach setting their LODQ the same way. That was the intent of the recommendation. Now looking back at the definitions versus what's in the regs, I have to admit that there is a good definition of LODQ in the regulations. There's also guidance on how to set them. The issue is that we're not accounting for sample matrix while we're setting these. So some people can set their LODQs in different matrices than what's being tested by, and it's leading to some of the misinformation that's out there. So therefore, unless public comment does provide some new information and insight, I would like to focus or withhold this recommendation until we have further discussion, and then focus on number 2, which is trying to standardize what matrix can be used for validation. Right now, we have flower, infused products, and inhalables as our 3 sectors, I believe. For testing lights, I could have misquoted that, but there are 3. And in order to be an annual license, you have to validate on all 3 matrix types. And what we're trying to do here is provide clarity for labs to know which matrices will be acceptable for validation, so they don't spend copious amounts of money preparing something and then the DCC not accepting it, and also trying to get everyone clarity on what it's going to be to move, or what it's going to require, excuse me, to move towards an annual license. So that was one of the main things that we heard feedback on, is that the labs aren't clear on what should be validated, and some labs aren't validating in matrix that are proper to actually lead to good, robust information. So trying to get the DCC to go ahead and present what we can validate in will clear up a lot of that and help us move forward. The third one here about approving PT programs. Right now, PTs are not reflective of what the requirements of the industry are. For instance, some of the analyte levels are 3-4 times of the actual action level of what the DCC requires. So therefore, they're not really reflective of what the DCC, how the DCC wants labs to perform. So therefore, if the DCC worked with providers to become approved, like most other industries have approved PT certain times of the year, and you select and you order your PT when you're supposed to from the allowed vendors. So if the PT vendors had more oversight and requirements from the regulators, they would then be under the same scrutiny we are to be up to date and have PT exams that actually reflect what we're required to do as a lab. So essentially, we're trying to get people from choosing an easy test to say that they're good and then not really being able to perform at the levels the DCC says. And then finally, the last recommendation is about a retention sample. With all the lawsuits that are happening against for consumer fraud against brands, we think it's best to really lock in a solid, unadulterated chain of custody sample that can be tested for confirmation that hasn't been adulterated by the lab in any way. Right now, the lab does take plenty of sample, more than we need to, but we're supposed to homogenize it all. And that process can actually adulterate the sample and allow there to be maybe a difference in what's on the shelf and what the lab has in their retention. So the idea isn't to take more material from any producer or from any distro. The idea is to make sure some of that material is set aside, unadulterated, and held by either the distro or the lab for a certain amount of time, so the DCC can come behind and do confirmation testing, and the brand and the lab don't have to point fingers at each other about who did what, how the data was produced, and it'll be clear, so to speak, and how I think about it in court, so to speak, if the way that these things are headed, the DCC will actually have a foundation to stand on and stand behind this system, as eventually someone's going to blame, I believe, the Bureau and some of this misinformation that's at retail. And this is to address potency inflation, as well as also people passing products that do have safety failures and getting them to the shelf. This is to accelerate the conversation and enforcement when you find out that labs are actually manipulating data versus there could have been something wrong with the sample that they did take. But now there is a sample that's withheld and hasn't been touched, that eliminates all that conversation and back and forth and accusing licensees about what's happened. So that was maybe too quick. I'm more more than willing to talk on each topic with the committee here, and I will do my best to respond to the public comment that does come forward. But with that, I would like to open up the conversation to the committee if there's any interest in talking about what the lab subcommittee is up to.
Well, I do have a quick question. I just want to make sure that when you refer to PT, are you referring to proficiency testing?
Correct. Yeah, that's spelled out in the agenda there. But yeah, so the labs are required to take proficiency testing twice a year. And right now you can select from any vendor that's technically ISO 17034 certified, but the types of the types of analytes and levels of analytes is up to them. And we've seen some of the analytes are in there at levels to where you don't even have to be validated to be able to see it. It's so high, it doesn't really prove anything.
Okay, thank you for that. That was my only question. I just wanted to make sure I was tracking correctly. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Chair, or Vice Chair, excuse me. So if there are any questions from the actual committee, I would love to take them now, or even some of the intent behind what we're trying to work on, the problems we're trying to solve, because they do impact people besides just the laboratory licenses if some of these things were to move forward.
And so committee members, if you'd like to participate in the conversation or ask questions, you can feel free to unmute and chime in and or raise your hand. But we can also go to public comment and then have further discussion before considering these recommendations.
Hi, Chair Navidal. I have a couple questions, and just because I'm new, I think it's helpful for me to get a little bit more background on the laboratory side of things. The DCC regulations more clearly define the LOD, LOQ. Is that not clearly defined in the regulations? And forgive me my ignorance of this. Like, how is it currently described?
No, it's not ignorant at all. That's why I was trying to describe it the first. When you actually go into the so we had a meeting, and the topic of discussion was the fact that Category 1 pesticides currently fail as a detection of the lab's limits for those pesticides. Um, and there's very different limits throughout the industry. Different labs are saying we're here, other labs are saying we're there. So what we're trying to do, since we can't change that rule and set an action limit, we're trying to standardize the approach to it. And the DCC does have guidance to it. It's just it gives you options. So therefore, people are choosing different ways to go about it. And we do believe that if you require matrix, which is like any instrument deals with solutions. So maybe let's just call it alcohol. You know, you're putting straight alcohol with maybe some THC analyte in there. Well, matrix means that we're accounting for the fact that this could be an edible, or it could be flour, or it could be oil or concentrate. So that's what matrix means. So what now the scientists in this industry believe, and I've seen it from operating these labs, is that once you make someone set their LODQ within a matrix, it may not be able to fall under some of the guidance that is currently written out. And that's why I think we need more time to actually give a better suggestion. So I was trying to admit the DCC does have guidance in there, but right now there's still a lot of wiggle room within there that we have to try to tighten that variance on. And I think we need more time before I am comfortable submitting something about this, unless there is a comment that answers those questions here today.
Thank you.
I have two questions. Thank you, Member Frazier, for that, your work on this committee and for this helpful summary. So a lot of this is kind of very technical, laboratory science oriented work. And so for people who aren't familiar with, you know, what goes into testing and all of these things, it's a little hard to follow. So I want to make sure that I can vote in a way that feels like, you know, I understand enough of this to be supportive or not. And so for the second one, the DCC defined which products can be used during matrix specific validation. So that sounds like we want DCC to get more specific about the way that testing requirements are done, and in particular that that the testing procedures need to have more specificity depending on what type of product it is. Is that fair? Okay.
That is correct.
Okay. So
and I can expect a little bit more into that if it helps. So I don't want to keep misspeaking on the three product types, but between flour, concentrates, and edibles, which are pretty much how you can think about them, the DCC has defined those three different product types. And what we're saying is that give us a matrix, give us a product within that category, because there's thousands or whatever, hundreds within it. Give us a few that you will allow us to set up our instrumentation and our methods using, so that we're all playing the same game and not kind of picking different types. Because if you're testing this stuff in the market, you should be able to validate for it. But instead of validating for 1,000 different types, give us a few that you want to see. So at least we've all passed that threshold. That's the idea.
So it's kind of standardizing the benchmarks.
Correct.
Okay. And then for the fourth one, that sounds like there's concerns in the process that like contamination, or you know that at different phases of testing things might go a little bit awry, and that by holding a specific amount of cannabis product for confirmation testing, that would help to eliminate concerns about phases in the testing where things might go awry. Is that
that could be a part of it? Absolutely. The focus of this was a lot of the potency fraud and some of the label claim lawsuits that are starting to happen. Right now, the lab takes the sample, we're told to homogenize it all. You can potentially exhaust all the material. So if the DCC was to come behind and say, hey, the producer says they did it right, you say you did it right, let me get that sample so that I can do some confirmation testing. One, there could be no more left. Two, the process of homogenizing or getting it ready for testing could actually introduce error to where then you wouldn't be able to say what happened with that chain of custody. Was it actually the distributor? Was it manufacturer? Or was it something the lab did? You wouldn't be able to conclusively say. So what we're trying to do here is we take more than enough material already. So instead of making us homogenize it all, just like other states do, have some in that final packaging still, or still, you know, flour that hasn't been touched, So when someone else comes behind you to replicate your process, there is no argument about, what may have happened or who may have caused it. That is the idea, because I do feel like the lawsuits are only going to get worse until the labs and, no offense to people that think they have 40% flour, but until this stuff goes away, lawyers are going to continue getting smarter and smarter about how to punish brands and how to make money. And I think it's only going to get worse until there's a crackdown on these laboratory practices.
I see. And is there a downside to doing this in terms of, I don't know, administrative burden or liability in some way?
Yes. So the issues we talked about was one, having take more material that's already taken for testing, and that's why I would say I think there's plenty already taken. So I don't want to take anyone more inventory for someone that could sell it. Two, I guess it could be a storage issue. I don't think it would be a major one, but if someone has a lot of compliant samples, whether the distro particularly who's not used to holding it could have issues, or the lab who's supposed to already be holding it already could say, in order to keep the packaging and to keep it intact, it's going to be more of a burden than the original requirement was. So I say inventory, and obviously taking masks or taking just storage and inventory, excuse me, are the two things I think could be a concern, but I think there's a smart way to do it within the current rules. Or those are things that we talked about. Now, other people could see other alarms, but those are things that we talked about.
Yeah. And the samples could be held for a certain period of time and then destroyed or whatever, so that it's not just continuously filling, right?
Yeah, so the idea was that I think labs have to hold for, oh my goodness, I wish I could quote the rules for you now, but I want to say it's either 45 or 60 days. So DCC, please don't punish me. This isn't me quoting the rules as such. But what I think, if the distributor was to hold it, give it 30 days and allow them to release it into inventory or go sell it. Like, that would be ideal, so that way no more product is wasted or destroyed. But to your point, if you had the lab hold it, yes, you could then destroy it with the regular cadence of their other retention samples. So that we're clear, the lab has to retain these samples already. So it's not a particularly extra burden on the laboratory. If distro did it, yes, that would be a change of process.
Okay. And then this is really helpful clarification for the third bullet. I'm not following it at all. I'm sorry. And I want to be able to vote on it. So
yeah, great. So I'll give a little more background on the third bullet. Or did you have more points on it before I cut?
No, I know. I'm not fully understanding what you're recommending.
So again, you guys gotta quote this, but proficiency testing is required by the DCC twice a year for laboratories. It is very common in industry. The biggest difference is that other industries tell you where you can buy your PT testing from and when you have to do it. That is not in the regulations right now. So any vendor that says the ISO 17034, which is a quality manual essentially for PT providers, if someone says that they are certified by that, technically their PT satisfies this requirement. The issue is that some of these providers are making the test too easy. You can just call it that. So some of these providers are well known to not produce quality tests or tests that challenge where the regulators say you should be able to read, right? When I say, like, the DCC sets a failure limit, the PT has it 5 times higher than that. So of course you're going to see it, right? Of course you're going to get it because it's so easy. But if you have it at the actual levels that failures are in the DCC, the lab may have a much harder time reading it. So essentially, we're trying to become more like other industry where PT is not someone being able to game or choose a PT provider that will have in the past. No, DCC, you hold them accountable to what they're producing and what they're testing us by, and therefore maybe these labs will be weeded out naturally versus the DCC having to spend so much time and money investigating and enforcing.
I see.
So I hope that helped.
That helped a lot. Thank you very much. Okay, and my last question is, so on the public health side, and I'll be discussing this more in kind of the next agenda item. There's some recommendations by various groups to do things like tax based on potency, or have other kind of like decisions that are regulatory decisions based on different levels of potency. And I want to understand what, if anything, any of these, if DCC were to follow all these recommendations, if that would have any implications for our ability to measure potency accurately and make regulatory decisions based on potency.
So all these actions are trying to standardize or harmonize how potency is tested. So this would actually make things more clear. That's not to say I agree with the idea of the tax, but yes, it would make it
Agree.
more of a fair practice, because then people wouldn't be choosing someone who's providing higher or lower numbers for whatever, game that they may be playing. It would just be the truth. And that's what labs should be doing, right? Labs shouldn't be gaming data. It should be about transparency. And all of these things are trying to make it about transparency versus a business practice. A lot of these things these labs are doing, they're trying to survive, if you want to say it that way. But I think as a lab professional, it should be about truth of data, not about survival. Maybe, so I don't want to go too far off my pedestal here, but I just don't agree that labs should be doing anything to create bias in their testing. The lab should do its best to provide the truth and nothing but the truth. That's how I see it.
Great, that's very helpful. That's all my questions. Thank you so much.
Are there more? Yeah, I didn't realize, the background probably wasn't very in depth for some people. So please, if there's more questions or confusion about what we're trying to do or what these recommendations are, please ask.
I have a question on number 4. It sounds like it could be an opportunity for like quality assurance, quality control. Is that something that's already worked into the system where there's like a 10% that like retesting? Are laboratories already expected to reanalyze samples for some degree of quality assurance and quality control?
Yeah, so you do have to confirm failures. There's lots of required quality samples that have to be run along with your batch to ensure you're reporting accurate data. But there is quite a wide acceptance criteria for it. Even the 10% label claim allows, let's call a 90% THC oil. Technically, I can label it between 81 and 99. That's just too large, That's fine when you're talking about flower, maybe, but when you get into high-end concentrates, I don't think some of our variances are very good regulation, and that's something else that we are working on. That's something else that we are trying to work on. But yeah, there are some quality assurance things that could be tightened up, and we're hoping that this first step of just having better accountability, so to speak, right? If there's no sample that the lab can adulterate, then at least the DCC can come behind and feel confident that if they can't confirm the data, the lab did something wrong versus the lab trying to accuse of them, oh, I got a different sample than what they put on the shelf. That's what's happening right now. And if there is no more, we can move to public comment, or again, we're going to talk about this again.
I have a quick question, if I may. So on item 4, could those samples that are held or retained by the distributor or the laboratory be used to confirm or investigate, say, an adverse event that was reported by a consumer or a patient?
Is that was that a question or a statement?
It is a question. I'm just asking if they could also be used for adverse event
I
investigation.
think any of that, yes, adverse event, whether it be a lawsuit or just a patient wanting the truth, I think they're all very important, and there should be a cleaned way of investigating, because I do think the patient is the people that are losing, because they're paying for products, a premium for products, excuse me, for THC that doesn't exist. So I definitely think that's just as important as the lawsuits that I mentioned earlier.
Right, but it could also be utilized, I imagine, item 4, right, if it was implemented. The retention of that sample could be used to confirm that there was potentially a contaminant or not a contaminant.
Absolutely.
Fall ill, which would be horrible, but
that is absolutely part of it as well. I mean, yes. And then we can go beyond that to there should be shelf life testing, but those are things that we're trying to think about later. Right now, we're trying to think about what's low hanging fruit that would at least give better accountability for enforcement to feel confident to move on some of the scrupulous players.
Okay, thank you. I have no further questions, but members, if you have additional questions or comments, please feel free to chime in or raise your hand. Looks like Member Woolsey would like to have the floor. Member Woolsey?
Thank you. My question is related to number 4. Is there a time frame that they would be expected or that you're recommending they hold these samples for?
None of that is a great question. I guess we can build that into the formal one. We can keep it at the same amount of the current retention sample, which I don't have in front of me, but I'll look it up during public comment, and we can. And then when we are formally presented, we can discuss it. But I want to say 45 days or 30 to 45 days is the current requirement, and we'll probably keep it very similar.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other hands raised at this moment, so I think we could go on to public comment if that works for you, Member Fraser.
Chair Neville.
Oh,
Vice Chair
please.
Neville, this is Member Brown. Somehow I got put onto the attendees list, but I'm just really happy to see something like this coming forward. As a cultivator, I remember the first time we went into a testing lab and the owner offered us to join their more or less their membership program. And it was like this wink wink moment where he's like, oh yeah, pay extra and more or less we make sure all of your tests pass. And it was like, wait, what? We've been, we've known that there's a variation within the testing lab. So to tighten.
Member Brown, your connection's a little bumpy. We keep losing you. You're in and out a bit.
Am I in and out?
Sounds like you just came back. You may be back now.
Okay. Well, I'm just really happy to see something like this coming forward because the lab companies have not been honest from what we've seen, and we've had to take our own samples and retain them ourselves in case extractors or manufacturers have positive tests. We've ran our safe samples against them to show that, no, we didn't have contamination in our batch samples. So I appreciate this coming forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Member Fraser, would you like to go to public comment at this time?
Yes, and again, we can still talk about it as we formally present them. So I think it's time.
Okay, great. Moderator, would you please open public comment on this agenda item?
Absolutely. So we are now taking public comment on agenda item number 4. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon next to your name if you've logged into the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you've called into the meeting. You'll have 2 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and when your time is up, you'll be muted and we will move on to the next commenter. You have one opportunity to speak on this agenda item, and we are going to kick off public comment with Matt Garay. I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Actually, Raquel speaking. Matt and I are logged in together. Raquel from PSI Labs in California, formerly PH Solutions. So my comment is on the first one and the last topic. The first one where I know, Antonio, you said you wanted to hold off on it until you're more comfortable. But the problem is that the labs that have the lower LODs are dying because of this lab shopping that's going on. The regulations does very strictly stipulate that the LOQ for all the category 1s has to be 0.1 ppm. So why not just set the LODs to a third of that? Because it follows the line of thinking that the signal to noise for LOQ is 1 to 10, signal to noise for LOD is 1 to 3. So if we just set an easy formula to the third of the LOQ, it standardizes everything, and there's no way that could be misconstrued for something else or use elaborate math or fancy math to make your numbers higher. As for the fourth one about the extra retainers, you had mentioned that we take more than enough for most of the samples. That is true for flowers, and that is true for gummies. However, for pens, particularly half-gram pens and 250 milligram pens, sometimes we barely have enough in order to run the test that we need to run, which goes back to another comment I'd like to add. The regulations have a minimum sample weight that we need to use for each test. That minimum sample weight is completely arbitrary. that minimum sample weight should be based on the validation, not some arbitrary number. And because of that arbitrary number that was added in the last revision of the regulations, we are required sometimes to take more than what is required, because if we
30
take
seconds.
only 10, I know, but you guys had a lot. At a half gram amount, we don't have enough. There's nothing left for us to retain, and we would have to retain more. Not to mention, if we only retained 1 or 2, it wouldn't be enough to repeat any of the tests that are required in case there was a lawsuit. And just one last thing, because somebody added about the tax for THC. If we start taxing THC, the lab shopping is going to be the opposite of what is happening right now. Now people are shopping for the highest lab, for the highest bidder of the highest.
Josh Sweeter, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Try to be quick as possible. The couple comments, LQLODs, if Raquel just suggested 33 parts per billion would be called an action level then, and I more than agree with that, because then everyone would have an action level for category 1 pesticides. That's why this is a problem. The second topic, I believe, would be the PTs. PTs, Antonio, I'll correct you myself, because we've conducted PTs. The action levels are 100 times what you see in a PT, not 5. So 100 parts per billion would be an action level. I'll see 10 parts per million in my PT. Does not make sense. They are not matrix as well. So third thing, matrix validations. You should really look at matrix validations, not necessarily non-matrix. Pseudomatrix are also problems. These are things called ionization efficiency and interference when you're talking about mass spectroscopy, and this is where we see problems. If you do a matrix, non-matrix matched validation, you are not accounting for the problems you see with these specific pesticides. This is being ignored, at least at the labs that do not contain annual licenses, which does not seem like a fair playing field for labs that do contain annual licenses. Continuing on the list, the last one with the sample retention, I believe. The sample retention needs to be longer than 45 days. That is the current regulation, because this sample retention needs to be seen as everyone's benefit, not just a laboratory. As in the producers, if you get a fail at a laboratory and you're positive the fail's not there, you should be able to contact this DCC and tell them that, and then you can go get it off the shelf with an unretained sample. Because if it's a homogenized sample, the lab could have contaminated, the lab could have done something wrong to your sample. So it's not a benefit in one round over another, or attacking potency inflation. It's something that should be happening, so we make sure that everyone is on the same playing field and no one's making mistakes to cause everyone amount financial damage in this industry that can't be able to tell.
Thank you.
Probably have 5 more things to say.
Lillian Grace, I've sent you a request to unmute.
In consideration of the current review and protocols that they're looking at, there has to be some consistency in the vetting process. And there has to be some consistency in the actual protocol for what is submitted and how it's validated. Right now, I get it. We're walking into the entryway, but we also have to consider that California has had 26 years of this industry that has been unregulated without any particular protocol. And that has to be taken in consideration for how vendors are operating with all of the new regulations coming out every single week. There isn't a consistent vetting process to validate what is or is not tested in these laboratories. And the education protocol for the laboratories has to fall on someone's shoulders. So I'm recommending that DCC take some accountability and provide those process and procedural, or at least an MOS for the vetted contracted vendors, as well as how that process is going to go on the management side for the licensees. Thank you.
Thank you. Shelley Duteau, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Shelley Duteau. I am the Chief of Human Health Assessment for the Department of Pesticide Regulation. I would like to speak to Antonio Fraser's first bullet back on his slide about the LOD LOQ. My department has transmitted a memo in 2019 to DCC suggesting moving some of category 1 pesticides to the category 2 list with specific screening levels. We also have the capacity with my staff of developing specific screening levels for all type 1 pesticides. This might eliminate the issue, not with the matrix issues, but the issue of lab shopping if we have a specific health-based number as we do for the type 2 category. I welcome conversations with the laboratory subcommittee and continuing conversations with DCC about our recommendations. Again, from the Department of Pesticide Regulation. Thank you for this ability to comment.
Thank you. Right, anyone else like to comment on agenda item? Oh, everyone has one opportunity to speak on each agenda item.
Moderator, I was unclear if there's one party or two parties that wanted to comment from Matt Gray's line.
I will send them a request to unmute. Let's see.
I think you sent me the request to unmute, but I did have my hand raised to make a comment, but if someone else was supposed to go first, that's fine.
No, go ahead. It jumped up on my screen ahead of Matt. So Matt Garay, if you have there was two of you on that call, I will call on you next if you have the other person wants to make a comment. But for now, Jason, go ahead.
Thank you so much. So yeah, committee members, thank you again for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jason Sarouche. I'm from the Public Health Institute. I just would like to express my support for these 4 recommendations and really kind of build on Chair Nevidal's comment about the importance of retention samples. Before this position, I was working as a product safety analyst for the Maryland Medical Cannabis Commission. It was actually during the 2019 outbreak of e-cigarette or vaping product use associated lung injury, or EVALI, as you probably all know it. And really the fact that the state required licensees to keep retention samples for an extended period of time proved to be extremely important, just to be able to go back and see if there were any contaminants in those products and figure out what was causing these cases of EVALI. So, or try and figure out what was causing them. We still don't really know. But yeah, so I just want to support the motions and just say retention samples are super important. Thank you.
Thank you. So Matt Garay, I've sent you a request to unmute.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Matt speaking. I'd like to make a quick comment regarding the tax on the THC levels. Considering how egregious the lab shopping is with the consumer, I can only see that it'll go the opposite way. And second of all, regarding the retaining samples, we're going to see a problem with that with the half-gram carts because, as everybody knows in the lab industry, our clients don't fill them up to the half-gram mark. That'll be all. Thank you.
Thank you. Sarah Otis, I've sent you a request to unmute.
I wanted to also comment on the last item. I definitely agree that we should be, right now we are required to homogenize all of the samples that we take. So there is no allowance for being able to retain one sample in the original packaging that we could then go investigate a failure and again see if it's like caused by lab contamination. And then the second part of that is that if we did have a question from someone that tested a product off the shelf and there was a lawsuit involved, again, homogenizing all of that sample would change the shelf life. It would change, you know, the stability of any contaminants that were in that. And so it would be really important that we would be able to retain, that we would be allowed to retain one sample that was in the original packaging to go back and investigate any issues. And then with regards to the PTs, I just wanted to add that if you were doing a PT where you have to consume the entire sample, like say a residual solvent test, where we've seen this year, again, like Josh said, analytes, Cat 1 analytes that are, you know, hundreds of times what we would normally see in a sample. If we have to go back, if it's above our calibration limit and we would have to go back to dilute that sample to get it into the calibration range, there might not be an opportunity if the sample, all of the sample is consumed in the testing process. And then, you know, somebody could fail a PT because they can't dilute that sample or they can't get it into their calibration range. So we really need PTs that are geared toward the California action levels and the California analytes in order to have those be representative of the samples we see on the
30
market.
seconds.
Thanks, I'm done.
Thank you. It looks like we are done with, we don't have any more comment on agenda item number 4. Would you like to close public comment for agenda item number 4?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, thank you so much for all the comments on this item. Member Frazier, I'd like to hand the floor back to you if I may.
Thank you. With that being said, I do understand the urgency of the Category 1 pesticide issue. Very thankful to the Department of Pesticides for coming and speaking on that. That was exciting to know that they're participating in this, and I hope that they participate in the future lab subcommittee meetings where we dive further into it. But I still do not see a clear pathway with enough feedback yet to present something regarding LODQ. I definitely want to host a conversation in future meetings and have a more specific suggestion. But right now, I think for us to, as the one suggestion said, make it a third of the LOQ, which is a way of going about it. I still don't think it's reflective of matrix to it doesn't solve the matrix to matrix issue that we're still seeing. So all that being said, I do want to formally put together a suggestion based on the last 3 points, and I'm going to do them all together. If there's any
A motion, perhaps?
a motion, sorry.
Thank you.
I want to make a motion to recommend the last 3 bullet points all together. If there are any issues with any of the language or anything specific that the committee thinks should be added to them, because I think right now I would like some feedback on the retention time. It is 45 days currently by the DCC with the sample, but it could take a lot longer for something to. It could be a lot longer to for it to be relevant in a court case and whatnot. So I would love some feedback from distro about storage space, inventory, the concerns about that time, or do we leave it open-ended for the DCC? Right, like those are the things that I would love some feedback on before I move forward with the 4th recommendation here.
If I may, I'm just gonna chime in quickly here. I think the sample retention, I don't feel that I have enough information, even with some product quality background to recommend a timeline here. I also, I mean, it's probably best practices for the cultivator and the manufacturer to hold retention samples back. But as a starting place, I think that this recommendation, the 4th recommendation or the 4th bullet point that we're discussing currently, is a great starting place, and will likely either have a recommendation from DCC about a timeline and or once implemented, say if it was to be implemented, the experience of going through that process and the feedback that comes up will probably bring forward better timelines or comments supporting timelines. I don't necessarily feel like we need to crack that today, I guess, is my short response here. Long-winded short.
Understood. Anybody else have any comments related to timeline? No? Okay. Well, in that case, I would like to make a motion to suggest to the DCC to define which products can be used during matrix-specific validation, to establish a process to approve ISO 17034 proficiency testing providers, and to require the distributor or laboratory to hold a specified amount of unadulterated cannabis or cannabis product for confirmation testing. And that's the motion, but I don't know, do I need to add for them to consider the matrix type? Because I do agree that vape carts of half grams are much different situation than flower. Do I need to specify that, or you think that'll get worked out in the process as well?
I imagine that would get worked out in the process.
Okay. I just wanted to acknowledge that on record that I do agree with, the public comment regarding it, and, we need to figure out how to account for all of such. But that would be my formal recommendation for the subcommittee. Sorry, for the main committee.
The formal motion.
Correct.
I will second your motion, Member Fraser. And then I'd like to go to the committee members to see if there's any comments or questions about the motion that is currently on the floor. Okay, well, seeing no requests for further discussion on this motion from committee members, moderator, would you please call the vote on this motion?
Certainly, I'm going to reread the motion though first, so that because we added a word. So we'll, the laboratory subcommittee would like to present a motion that DCC regulations define which products can be used during matrix specific validation, that DCC establishes a process to approve ISO 17034 proficiency testing providers, and that DCC regulations require a distributor or laboratory to hold a specified amount of unadulterated cannabis or cannabis product for confirmation testing. So do I have a
That is
second?
correct. Sorry.
Sure. Do I have a second?
Yes, I second that motion. Thank you, moderator.
All right, so we will go to a vote. Dr. Imani Brown?
Yes.
Jeremy Brown? I'll go back to him. Yes?
Aye. Yeah.
Member Christensen?
Yes.
Member Clifford?
Aye.
Member De La Rosa?
Yes.
Member Frazier?
Yes.
Member Mathey?
Aye.
Member Payan?
Aye.
Member Shockley?
Aye.
And Member Tupy?
Aye.
And Member Woolsey?
Aye.
All right, motion passes.
And this is Member Neville. I haven't been called for any votes, but I would have voted yes on all three of those, or on the equity subcommittee items and the laboratory subcommittee item. So I'm not sure why that is, but I'm a yes vote, just for the record.
Perfect. I have you as a yes.
Okay, excellent.
Thank you.
Okay, well, that concludes the laboratory subcommittee update and presentation agenda item. We're at 12:07 and we have the public health subcommittee item, which is item 4, and then we have future agenda items as an agenda item as well. I'm wondering if we should break for lunch at this time.
I would support that.
Okay. It looks like recommended lunch time is about 30 minutes. So it is 12:08. Should we re-adjourn this meeting or call the meeting back to order, I guess I should say, at 12:40, giving folks about 30 minutes for lunch?
Thank you.
Let's do it. Thank you.
Okay,
Thank you.
great. We'll see everyone back at 12:40. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Vice Chair Nevedal, have you returned?
I have. I'm back. I think we
Very
can.
good.
Do you want to do a roll call to see if we have a quorum?
You bet. Let's do that right now.
Thank you.
Dr. Imani Brown, are you back?
Yes, I am.
Jeremy Brown. I'll go back to him. He has some trouble, audio trouble. Robin Christensen
Yep, here.
and Member Clifford. Christine De La Rosa.
Present.
Member Frazier.
Present.
Member Mathey
Present.
and Member Pan. Member Shockley. Member Tupy.
Present.
Member Woolsey.
Present.
Vice Chair Nevedal. Let's go back up. Jeremy Brown. Member Clifford. Member Payan. Member Shockley. All right, we do not have a quorum right at this time, so we need to wait, I think, a couple minutes.
Okay, let's try again in a couple of minutes. Thank you.
Member Shockley just texted and asked you to raise him because he's in the audience.
Great, I can do that right now. There he is.
And it looks like Member Brown is in the audience as well.
Yep, just saw that. And Clifford. Okay, excellent. All right, so we have Member Brown, Member Clifford.
Yeah, Member Clifford's here.
Got it. Perfect.
Member Shockley here.
So we do have a quorum. We are still missing Member Pan. Oh, she actually is out. So I think we are. All right, so we have a quorum.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. This is Member Nevedal. We'll go ahead and call the meeting back to order and move on to agenda item number 5, which is hearing from the Public Health and Community Impact Subcommittee. They'll be providing an update and presentation of recommendations today. So with that, I'm going to turn the floor over to Subcommittee Chair, Member Mathey.
Thank you so much, Madam Vice Chair. So I'm going to report on the meeting of the Public Health and Community Impact Subcommittee. We met on May 24th to discuss the topic of THC concentrations and potency in cannabis products and potential impacts of those products on public health. The focus of the discussion was specifically on adult use or recreational cannabis use, not medical cannabis. We recognize that there are issues related to potency and medical cannabis as well. But for this meeting, we just focused on adult use. We heard from 2 speakers and then consequently developed 1 motion. And I want to take just a few minutes to briefly summarize what we learned from each speaker, because I think it will help everyone to understand where the motion comes from and why we developed the motion that we did. And then we can discuss the motion itself. So the first speaker we heard from was Dr. Catherine Hess, who is with the California Department of Public Health, or CDPH. And she reported to us on the role of CDPH in California cannabis, the areas in which they have regulatory authority or otherwise do work to prevent cannabis-related harms or educate the public and so forth. And the most important thing that she was reporting on was to let us know that they hosted a high potency THC think tank meeting in December of 2022. And the goal of that meeting was to to convene a variety of different cannabis experts and to elicit recommendations from them on research, health effects, and social impacts of high potency cannabis products, and to identify potential policy approaches that could be used, policy and regulatory approaches that could be used to reduce the health risks of high potency cannabis products. And so the experts at that meeting identified a range of potential policy solutions. They included things like potency-based taxes or THC purchase limits. A variety were listed, but there was no specific recommendations that came out of that meeting. It was more to say, these are the policy options that are out there, and these are policy options that some other states or other countries have been using or considering. And so to be clear, these are not policy recommendations that our committee necessarily endorses, and we didn't discuss whether or not we endorse them. We just heard from CDPH that these are policy options that they are thinking about. And so CDPH viewed that meeting, the December think tank, as a first step to gain information, to identify issues around, kind of understand the complexities of high potency products and the issues at play, and any additional information they will need in order to develop policy recommendations. For example, there isn't consensus on one clear definition of what constitutes a high potency product. There's been a variety of recommendations for how you could define it, but no consensus. And so if CDPH were to make policy recommendations, they would need to decide what that definition is, for example. So CDPH is going to engage further. Their plan is to engage further with experts who attended the December think tank, and they are planning to work with DCC to identify which of the policy options may be most promising for California. So as it relates to us, this was informative because now we understand that there is a planned process of continuing to gather evidence and recommendations from scientific experts, and for CDPH and DCC to work together to develop policy recommendations that would actually be feasible and appropriate for California. So it was helpful for us to understand that that process is happening. And then the second speaker we heard from was Dr. Beatrice Carlini from the Cannabis Research and Education Program at the University of Washington in Seattle. And she is one of the nation's leading experts on the availability and health risks and health benefits of high THC content cannabis products. And she's been deeply involved in leading scientific task forces and state contracts to develop policy recommendations for Washington state as it relates to potential harms related to high potency cannabis products. And so it was really helpful to hear from her and her experience in Washington state, and to understand how her experience might relate to what we might pursue in California. And so Dr. Carlini shared with us her most recent review of the evidence on THC concentration and health impacts. And so they gathered all the scientific evidence, whether it's positive or negative, or, of all different varying qualities, and kind of synthesized it. And so she summarized that for us so we could get up to speed on what does the evidence show about the health risks of high potency products. And then she also offered us her recommendations on policies and recommendations. So in terms of health risks, what she reported to us was that there is clear evidence that high potency cannabis is more detrimental to health than lower potency cannabis, especially in terms of the risk of addiction, particularly among youth, and for the development and exacerbation of psychotic disorders, among some other health concerns as well. And the second major takeaway on the scientific evidence is that there's clear evidence that higher potency cannabis products affect marginalized and vulnerable populations disproportionately when compared with traditional lower potency products. And so that includes youth, low income individuals, racial and ethnic minorities, are disproportionately using higher potency products and maybe disproportionately experiencing some of the health risks associated with them. So that was, we didn't review the scientific evidence. That was Dr. Carlini's report from their task force of experts. And then she shared with us the policy recommendations that her task force developed for Washington State, which were 3 things. First, to discourage the use of high THC cannabis products by developing a potency-based tax. The second was to prevent initiation of use of high THC products, first by prohibiting marketing, and second by increasing the purchase limit for high potency products to age 25. And then the third is to empower consumers and the public with information. And that would be through labeling, warning labels, public health education campaigns, and education at the point of sale. And so, again, I want to emphasize that our committee was not evaluating whether or not we agree with any of these policy recommendations or whether we want to put them forth ourselves. But it was helpful to hear that this is what's being recommended in other places. And so they may be things that we want to consider. And so following those presentations, the discussion amongst the members of the committee and the public was very robust. And we came to consensus around a couple of things. The first was that we wanted to focus on adult use, not on medical. We do agree that there's important considerations for medical cannabis and high potency products, but we didn't want to address those in our meeting on May 24th. The second was that it's clear that there's ongoing work at the California Department of Public Health involving an expert panel and a process to identify policy consensus for California and the development of specific recommendations. And that panel of experts is going to be more qualified to understand the science and to develop those recommendations. And so we decided it's probably not appropriate for us to develop specific recommendations, but rather we wanted to express our support for DCC's collaboration with the Department of Public Health to develop evidence-based recommendations that will hopefully protect public health and reduce some of the risks associated with higher potency products. And we want those recommendations to be seriously, whatever the recommendations come out of that process of DCC and CDPH working together with experts to identify recommendations. We want those recommendations to be taken seriously by DCC, but we did not feel comfortable kind of blindly endorsing whatever the recommendations are until we have a chance to see what they are. So I think the expectation is once recommendations are coming out of that process, we would revisit this topic and discuss whether or not we agree with them and whether we support them. We also just wanted to, we also talked about how we want this process of developing policy recommendations to be done efficiently, because it is an important statewide health issue that is having immediate impacts right now. And so we want to be moving forward with any regulatory recommendations and changes that are going to happen, to be moving forward with that in a reasonably timely manner. And the last thing was that the work that the California Department of Public Health has been doing, convening this expert panel and having this think tank around potency, is funded by the cannabis tax, and there's concerns that that the revenues from that tax have been declining, and as a result, some of the efforts of CDPH might be paused or not able to be fully realized because of funding shortages. And so we discussed that if that were the case, and if CDPH funding were limited to continue to pursue this work, we would want DCC to continue to pursue it. So considering all of that we made the recommendation that you see on the slide here, and I'll just read it out, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions from the committee members about this motion and our discussion. So first, I'll just read the motion. Our recommendation was, and I'm not making a motion right now, I'm just reading the recommendation for us to discuss. So the recommendation was that DCC continue to work with the California Department of Public Health to convene a balanced expert scientific task force exempt from conflicts of interest, i.e. no financial interest, to review the scientific literature on the issue of increasingly high THC potency of cannabis products, and to make public health recommendations to cannabis regulatory agencies and to the public. We also recommended that this work be a priority for DCC, regardless of funding available from CDPH, and that this work be completed urgently and no later than within the next 12 months. So that's what we came to, and now I would welcome any questions or discussion from the committee members.
So just a reminder, committee members should feel free to chime in to kick this discussion off or ask questions or to raise your hand, and we'll go ahead and create a stack and call on committee members. Maybe Member Christensen.
Hi. Yeah, I mean, I want to thank you so much, Subcommittee Chair Mathey, for presenting that. I was unable to attend the subcommittee meeting due to a conflict, but I did hear from my colleague, Dr. Hess, about how the presentation went and some of the feedback. So really happy to see this recommendation here and how it's framed as continuing to work collaboratively together as two partners in this space. You know, I think just for setting some of the context for this conversation, I want to be clear, like the Department of Public Health has no regulatory authority, or at least my program within the Department of Public Health has no regulatory authority over cannabis or high potency cannabis. Therefore, it's really incumbent upon us to be working together for CDPH to be bringing in some of that health effects related research, and also for the Department of Cannabis Control to be bringing their knowledge and experience with the regulatory frameworks that are available in the state and what we can best do there. I thought it was really interesting. Dr. Carlini was also a member of our task force that we brought together, and we plan to continue to keep her involvement because both Washington State and also Colorado State, who also were on the think tank, brought a wealth of information from their systematic review of high potency cannabis. So I just want to reassure folks that that is definitely inputs that are involved in our think tank process. Really, I think the question that we have before us is, given that all of the states have slightly different regulatory frameworks and different models, and we're all dealing with this evolving state of research, how can we best create a system within California that protects the public's health while also continuing to allow this business to grow and thrive in a safe and healthy way? So, you know, it's definitely not a small task to bite off in 12 months, but I just want to iterate that even though I wasn't there to vote on it, I'm very pleased to see this presented in front of the group today.
Thank you for that. I have some questions about the 12 months specifically. Is it long enough? Is it a long enough timeline to consider I think there was a research study funded in 2021 through the DCC funding pool that funds the university systems to conduct research that's specific to high potency. And I don't know if that information will be able to be included if we look at a 12-month timeline. And I don't know if this was discussed. I was not able to participate in the subcommittee meeting. But maybe some background on 12 months and if it is long enough.
That's a great question. And there wasn't a lot of deliberation that went in to the selection of 12 months as the benchmark. I think what we really wanted to express is that we didn't want this process to be drawn out over 5 years, that, you know, there's important issues at play here, and we want to communicate to DCC that this is something we want you to be actively working on right now. I am completely open to, we amongst the committee members, we really didn't discuss whether 12 months is a reasonable timeframe or considered other timeframes. And I'm definitely open to considering other timelines. We could definitely do some information gathering from similar processes that were done in other states like Washington and Colorado to see how long their processes took. But hopefully we can also learn from them and kind of not reinvent the wheel to some degree, and kind of build off of, you know, the evidence reviews that they've already done to expedite our own process. So I'm completely open to modifying the time frame if it seems like that it would be appropriate to. But I would also keep in mind that this is not binding. If they don't complete it within 12 months, the whole process dies. It would be kind of communicating we want this to be done as quickly as it can be done, and if it doesn't end up happening in 12 months, you know we will know that they're trying that we would be trying to do it in an efficient way. So that would be my reaction.
I think the way the recommendation is framed, that 12 months does work in the sense that it's making a public health recommendation within the 12 months. It doesn't say that DCC will be able to achieve those regulations. I mean, regulation packages have their own timeline and sort of life course. But that there will be a recommendation made. And I think an opportunity also to hopefully come back in front of the Public Health Subcommittee and have some of the public health staff present their findings and have a more in-depth discussion on what that recommendation might look like. I also would, the fact that it's non-binding does make it a little bit more manageable to swallow. I also would like to say, like, having that 12-month as a goal, it does keep the urgency on it. This is a really important public health issue for all of us to keep track of.
There's at least one hand raised. Member Fraser would like to chime in, but I want to ask about the description or the context, the background for this recommendation emphasizes adult use, but adult use isn't mentioned or referenced in the recommendation. And so I would hate for there to be unintended consequences or impacts to patients. I'm wondering if there's perhaps any will or desire to clarify that this is in relationship to adult use, so there'd be more time for patient input and the medical community to engage.
Completely agree. Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you for raising it. Yeah, I realized after we passed the motion, I realized that we were missing the words adult use somewhere in here, and I would love to add that. So I would propose a motion to make an amendment to add to clarify within this recommendation that we're specifically referring to adult use.
I would second that, Member Woolsey.
Thank you, Member Woolsey. And I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I'd like to go to Member Fraser, if I may. You have your hand raised, Member Fraser.
Yes. I guess my comment related to the timeline was maybe put a due date on the formation of it to ensure that it's put together. And then why don't we coordinate any type of recommendations with some type of, I don't know, recent data, or, I'm not sure if there's any big reports coming out, but I know between UCLA, DCC, the funding going out, why would we coordinate recommendations based upon when we get one of these large reports about our market being released, and then, because I mean, we don't want to do something too early where the data may not be relevant, and we don't want to wait too long because it is important. But there is a lot of work being done, from my understanding, on evaluating the market and these product types and some of the challenges. And that would be my thought on maybe amending it to be more effective or impactful.
Thank you really very much for that comment, Member Fraser. I'm trying to understand exactly which kind of reports or data you have in mind that you think might shift the recommendations if we had them in hand.
That's where I'm hoping there'd be some people that'd be more aware, but I just know there's a bunch of universities working on the information. There's doctor groups, there's doctors running different programs. So I just know that hopefully we can put our thoughts together and try to identify one to make it. I know it'd be tough on this call, but between the public and ourselves, maybe we can consider that.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a great question. Yeah. I wonder if there would be a way to kind of keep a goal of kind of moving forward with making recommendations, since it does feel like we're already kind of behind the ball. And then also build in a process for incorporating new information as it becomes available. The literature on cannabis legalization and the health impacts of cannabis use, the scientific literature is changing every day. So, we can't necessarily wait for like the scientific literature to stop changing, because it's just going to keep rolling. But I agree that there are a couple of specific studies, in particular one funded by DCC, led by Bo Kilmer, looking at simulating the impacts of a potency-based tax and what kind of the impacts of that would be on the state, and that would be a really helpful. The findings from that study would be really specifically helpful for considering. So my inclination, and open to further discussion on this, would be to say, let's make it a goal of kind of moving forward with the information that we have. And as more information becomes available, we can also incorporate it.
I would support that. That's similar to other models that we have within public health. As new information comes to light, you adjust the public health recommendation.
And so is that perhaps a request to have an additional friendly amendment to the recommendation that would, I don't know, maybe add language on that says and no later than within 12 months, but also continue to report on additional studies that may impact public health recommendations? I'm not sure.
Or or maybe within the next 12 months, with the opportunity to revise recommendations as new data or evidence comes to light. Let me write that down. So I'll make that motion to include a friendly amendment that specifies that. So it would be within the next 12 months, with the option to revise the recommendations as new data or evidence comes to light.
All right, thank you for clarifying that, Member Mathey. A second on that?
Member Woolsey, I'll second.
Thank you, Member Woolsey. Okay, so we've got two friendly amendments. Further discussion from committee members regarding this item. Okay, well, thank you for the presentation and all of the work and the discussion amongst committee members. And I think we can go to public comment on this item. Okay, moderator, would you please open up public comment on agenda item number 5?
Yes, I can. Good afternoon. We are opening public comment on agenda item number 5. If you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking on the hand icon next to your name if you've logged into the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you've called into the meeting. You'll have 2 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and when your time is up, you will be muted. We will move on to the next speaker. Each member of the public will have one opportunity to speak on each agenda item. And with that, Amy Jenkins, I've sent you a request to unmute.
You, Chairwoman Nevedal, and committee members, appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm here on behalf of the California Cannabis Industry Association, also known as CCIA, and I'm very appreciative of the dialogue today and the clarification that the recommendation applies specifically to adult use products. We had assumed that it captured both medicinal and adult use. My outstanding concern on behalf of the association just pertains to the express exclusion of representatives from the legal cannabis industry. We feel that as representatives of the industry, we have the most knowledge and experience with THC products, and it seems contradictory not to include individuals with that level of experience, especially since there is ongoing emerging science on this matter. So we would appreciate that particular reference being excluded, though we do applaud the work of the subcommittee and are encouraged to hear that the Department of Public Health is also convening some discussions in this area. Finally, I would note that CCIA is proud to be authoring a bill, SB 540, this year that does direct the development of a brochure and other educational materials to better inform consumers. And the bill is being specifically amended to address the specific effects associated with high THC products. So a lot of the work that we are doing as an industry mirrors that of what the subcommittee is attempting to pursue. And we also have a task force that does or would allow at least for the inclusion of representatives from the cannabis industry. So I do thank you for the opportunity to present both our positive comments as well as our concerns, and hope that you'll take those into strong consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Joanna, I've just sent you a request to unmute. Go ahead, Joanna. Sorry about that.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good afternoon. The focus of this motion and the focus of the Public Health Subcommittee in general is gravely misplaced. As was discussed at the scoping for this subcommittee, the impacts of intoxicating hemp far exceed those public health concerns that are associated with regulated cannabis, regardless of potency. Intoxicating hemp products are found in potencies that are far greater than those in the regulated market. They are neither tested for safety nor age gated. They are untaxed and therefore far less expensive. And as a result, consumers are leaving the regulated industry. Intoxicating hemp is the primary reason that cannabis tax revenues are down. And related to your motion, I know that this was discussed in your subcommittee about how to fund the research that you want to do. My recommendation is that you rephrase your motion by changing the word cannabis to the word cannabinoid and make your motion agnostic to source. This will, in the long term, have the most positive externalities and will result in more appropriate data sets to protect public health. Thank you.
Thank you. Lynn Silver, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Dr. Lynn Silver from the Public Health Institute, pediatrician. We strongly support the resolution. We're very glad to see CDPH initiate this process. Regardless of tax availability, we would like to see this continue under the auspices of CDPH, even if DCC needs to provide supportive resources, given their epidemiologic and health expertise. We also strongly support the conflict of interest provision. It is absolutely essential. Across the U.S. government, scientific task forces to evaluate hazards from regulated products, whether pharmaceuticals or tobaccos or others, generally exclude individuals with conflicts of interest. That does not mean that business sectors affected cannot provide input. They should have that opportunity, but they should not be taking the decisions on what the health hazards are and the appropriate regulations. We also concur with the 12 months. As Dr. Matei pointed out, the science to give the definitive answers will never be definitive, but it will continue to evolve. Periodic updates of regulation based on evolving science will always be needed. We do recognize that the hemp products are a problem and would not be averse to having recommendations on hemp products that are also relevant and that are putting out high content, high psychoactive ingredient content products. So that's a possibility, but it should not stop the work that needs to be
30
done.
seconds.
We've also recommended and are working with the legislature on SB 540 to try and ensure that that task force is free of conflicts of interest as well, although that's not currently in the bill. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are taking public comment on agenda item number 5. If anyone would like to comment on agenda item number 5, please raise your hand. All right, Chair Nevedal or Vice Chair Nevedal, we are at the end of the public comment for item number 5. Would you like to close public comment? Oh, we do have one more. Just a moment. Dr. Yafai? There you go.
Reaches you all in between patients. I am a medical doctor who sees patients doing cannabis. I have been awarded one of the DCC's medical cannabis grants for this upcoming year with 3 other physicians in the state of California through UCLA. And the focus of that I'd like to bring to everybody's attention is that we keep not discussing the aspect of medical cannabis care, not the medicinal type that people are self-medicating, but the real medical uses and how that lends itself into potency. We have adolescents, we have children, we have babies, we have senior citizens, we have people who are both underprivileged as well as underfunded, who are on statewide insurance, who have needs that are not being addressed at all and fall under the constant veil of recreational users who are misusing or misguided in their use. And while it's important to acknowledge both of those situations, one is being very grossly misunderstood. And we still have not brought any of those discussions to any tables or any of the subcommittees. I see that you've brought one physician from out of state. Please do recognize that the way California has been dealing with medical cannabis for over 20, I think 4 or 5 years at this point, is very different from states like Washington, who have only had it for a few years. So I have been working with a number of other groups and organizations, CalNormal, as well as the state senators, to support bills such as SB 302 to provide improvements in access for patients over the age of 65. But again, it is so important for this group, the Public Health Subcommittee in particular, to acknowledge and create a space for medical cannabis use and a place where people can come and approach this committee. Thank you so much.
Thank you. JC, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Thank you for this opportunity to speak to you all today, and thank you members for your for volunteering to work on such important issues. Just want to lend my support to the recommendation. I was able to attend the subcommittee on public health, and it was great information, a really good dialogue between members of the public and the committee members. I think it's important that we maintain the urgency to look at these high potency marijuana products and the detriment that they're doing to our young people and to our communities. We see it on a firsthand basis. These high potency products that look like gummy bears and Skittles are in our middle schools, they're in our high schools. The principals and the SROs and the parents that we talk to are just kind of throwing up their hands and so discouraged that these products are so marketed and so easily accessible to our young people, and they're on the campuses, on all of our campuses, something we should be concerned about. So I just want to commend the subcommittee for working on this issue, trying to provide better public health. Thank you.
Thank you. Jason Sarouche, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jason Sarouche. I'm from the Public Health Institute. I just want to comment in support of this motion as amended. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Sarah Armstrong, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Good afternoon. I am Sarah Armstrong. I represent Americans for Safe Access in Los Angeles and Ventura counties. Can you hear me? Yes.
Yes.
Well, I understand that you might want to exclude people who have financial interest from exploration and decision making, particularly being able to vote on things. It's also true that there's great value in including the manufacturers of these high potency licensed products, people who market them, people who historically first began manufacturing them, so that you come to a full understanding of how this high potency market evolved, what the intentions were, how it works, etc. Only with this kind of information can you make fully reasoned recommendations about these products. The people who provide this information don't necessarily have to be part of a voting group or scientific exploration, but to have perhaps a separate panel of industry experts on this particular line of products can only be helpful in making decisions. For that reason,
30 seconds.
I would hope that while they may not fully participate as members, you will convene a group of people who can talk to you from an industry perspective and educate you on these high potency products. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, we are taking the last comments on agenda item number 5, last call. All right, Vice Chair Nevedal, it looks like we can close public comment on agenda item number 5.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm going to turn my camera off. I seem to be having some instability with my Wi-Fi. I apologize. Okay, so Member Mathey, can I turn the floor over to you, please?
Absolutely, thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So at this point, we have the option to further discuss the motion, the proposed recommendation. We can make further amendments, or we can move towards a vote. I would like to react to the recommendations regarding hearing from industry representatives, and in the way that policy and regulatory recommendations are made. So I completely agree that industry representatives have extremely valuable knowledge and experience that would help us to craft better recommendations that are likely to be more effective. At the same time, we need to recognize that industry has built-in financial incentives to increase potency, and that's not, there's no blame, that's not you know, I'm not trying to battle with industry here, but we just have to, you know, recognize that folks working within industry are legally bound to prioritize, when you are making decisions on behalf of a business, to prioritize profit. And the way that, one of the ways to increase profits is to make your product more addictive. And the way to do that is to increase potency. And we know that very well from alcohol and cannabis, and, or sorry, alcohol and tobacco. And so so that's kind of the balance we need to play, of really wanting to be able to draw on the knowledge and experience that industry has, the decisions that go into the types of products that they sell, how they manufacture, how they're manufactured, and how we can work together to reduce risks to the public, because we all have the same interest here in having a healthy cannabis industry that also keeps the public safe. I would welcome comments from the rest of the members of the committee on this issue. My recommendation, I think, would be to amend the motion to offer the option that that members of the public as well as industry could be involved in the conversation, could contribute to the information gathering component of this process that CDPH and DCC are going through, but they wouldn't be sort of kind of standing panel members with any sort of kind of power over the final recommendations that are made.
I do have some thoughts on that, and I'm wondering if we can actually go to the slide that has the recommendation, because I'm still seeing the public comment up.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So I think the subcommittee put an awful lot of thought into crafting this as it is, and the amendment that I feel comfortable supporting is like adding more clarity around how this is adult use and not medicinal marijuana. So I'll shelve that for now and probably want to do a friendly amendment about that. But when it comes to bringing in industry, I think the purpose, let's remind ourselves of the purpose of this task force. It's to review the scientific public health literature in this space. It's not to preclude any other conversations that may be going on with industry, between industry and DCC, or other channels of information to DCC to help to inform their regulatory strategies. This is simply public health's recommendation to DCC. And I think with that framework, it is helpful to narrow the scope and to look at this from an academic public health audience that has an absence of conflict of interest. We make a recommendation from that lens. And also, if industry groups are also providing similar input to DCC, that is also information that they evaluate and they include in that regulatory process. And I think as many of us are aware, this regulatory process is it's like an 18-month process. There are plenty of opportunities for input, both from the public, from industry, from interested parties. And I would strongly recommend that we maintain the recommendation as developed by the subcommittee.
Thank you, Member Christensen. It's really helpful to think of it that way, and I completely agree. And it's pretty powerful to think that these are public health recommendations, and there's no reason that DCC couldn't, in parallel, also be speaking with industry representatives and eliciting recommendations and kind of moving towards a set of regulations that harmonize the goals of industry and the goals of public health. And that's also something that we can pursue with further work within this subcommittee in future meetings as well.
And if I may, just I think a friendly reminder is important. We prior to going to public comment, we passed two friendly amendments. One that does include the clarification that this recommendation is pertains to adult use, and a second that clarifies that in addition to the next 12 months, there would be the ability to revise recommendations as new data comes forward. And I just wanted to make sure that we were all reminded of those recommendations or those friendly amendments. And then I wanted to acknowledge Member Tupi. Your video was on for a while, and I'm assuming you might have wanted to comment. And then it looks like a Member Woolsey would also like to participate. So Member Tupi, if you would like to unmute and participate in the discussion, that'd be great.
I was just going to reiterate that financial interest piece was discussed amongst the subcommittee, and the feeling was that the conflict of interest piece gave enough kind of leeway in that to kind of allow public health and DCC to make that determination about the conflict of interest piece.
Great, thank you for that. Member Woolsey.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment that I wouldn't support another amendment to this recommendation. I recognize what the public comments were about wanting to hear from the industry, and I think there is opportunity through the subcommittee public meetings and through this committee meeting. They have the opportunity to reach out to DCC directly, but the point of having this conversation was really to hear that other side of the coin, or that unbiased side of the coin, It might be that the subcommittee or the committee at large doesn't ultimately agree with that other voice, but we didn't want to cloud that other voice. That's why it's crafted this way, and trying to exclude from this particular recommendation people with a financial interest. It's not that they won't be heard or won't be able to speak. It's that we didn't put that as a part of this recommendation or this research study.
Thank you for that. Are there additional members who would like to participate in the conversation or ask questions perhaps about the recommendation and its amendments? Member Mathey.
Thank you. I completely agree with and support the comments from Member Tupi and Member Wolsey. Thank you for those. At this point, I would like to make a motion to pursue to adopt this recommendation, including the 2 friendly amendments. Do we need to vote on the amendments first and then the motion as a whole?
That's a good question. I believe we voted on those amendments before we went to public comment on those friendly amendments to the language.
It's really up. Hi, this is Angela McIntyre Abbott, counsel for the department. It's really up to you how you want to frame your motion. You could include your friendly amendments as part of your motion to adopt the recommendation, or you could entertain separate motions.
I see. Okay. My motion would be to adopt this recommendation with the inclusion of the 2 friendly amendments that we discussed, which, to remind everyone, were first to specify that this recommendation refers just to adult use cannabis. And second, that we include language that there would be the option to revise the recommendations as new data and evidence comes to light. I want to check to make sure that no one would like to separate out those amendments from the main motion. I think we're all in agreement, but I just want to pause for a second in case anyone would prefer they be separate.
Would it be helpful to read it back with the friendly amendments?
Sure. Okay. So the recommendation is that DCC continue to work with the California Department of Public Health to convene a balanced expert scientific task force exempt from conflicts of interests, i.e. no financial interest, to review the scientific literature on the issue of increasingly high THC potency of adult use cannabis products. So that's where the amendment comes in, adult use cannabis products. And to make public health recommendations to cannabis regulatory agencies and to the public. We also recommend that this work would be a priority for DCC regardless of funding available from CDPH, and this work be completed urgently and no later than within the next 12 months, with the option to revise the recommendations as new data or evidence comes to light. So that's the motion on the floor.
And I will second your motion. This is Member Navidal.
Thank you.
All right, going to go to a vote then. Dr. Amani Brown?
Aye.
Jeremy Brown? Member Christensen?
Aye.
Member Clifford?
Aye.
Member De La Rosa? Member Frazier?
Aye.
Member Mathey?
Aye.
Member Shockley?
Aye.
Member Tupi?
Aye.
Member Woolsey?
Aye.
And Vice Chair Nevidal?
Aye.
All right, let's see, Jeremy Brown? And Christine De La Rosa? Okay, so we have two not here.
I'm an aye. I'm sorry. I didn't know if you've been I've been pressing my space bar button and saying aye to all the votes. So I'm not sure if you're capturing that because I had to literally unmute. I couldn't use the space bar.
All right, yeah, I wasn't captured, but I got it this time. So it looks like the motion passes.
Okay, thank you so much. I just received a message from Member Brown, so I think you have to watch for him. If you would be so kind as to watch for him in the participants or attendees list, I think he got bounced again.
God, okay, great. And actually, Member Brown, if you can put your hand up, you come right to the top, so I can move you. If you just get booted again, you raise your hand.
Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. Well, I think that wraps up our public health subcommittee agenda item. So thank you so much for that information and all the work. Next, we'll go on to agenda item number 6, which is future agenda items. So we could have some discussion. Let's see, our next meeting is going to be set for September. We will include reports and recommendations from any of the subcommittees that meet between now and September at that next September committee meeting. Any subcommittees that are interested in meeting in July or August before the next meeting, please discuss directly with DCC staff to get that scheduled. I'll also work with DCC to build the September agenda, or most likely Chair Jamalian will work with DCC staff to build the September agenda on evolving conversations and upcoming activities. So are there any other agenda items that folks or members would like to see come forward in our upcoming meetings? We can have some discussion before we go to public comment on this item.
I'm not sure if this is something that we can do, but I would love to hear an update from DCC on the recommendations we've made up until this point. So if we can kind of revisit the recommendations that we've made and see, okay, what progress has been made on these so far, I would love to hear that.
That'd be great. See, and members, please do feel free to chime in or raise hands. It would be nice to also hear if there's any progress or desire from the DCC to make any changes or adjustments to licensing fees, if that might be coming forward, or if there's a fee study that's been done since the initial licensing fees were set that would help better inform if those licensing fees make sense or could be amended, perhaps reduced or restructured. And I'm wondering, this will be after some of the environmental regulations are elevated. I'm wondering if September would be too early to kind of learn if there's been impacts to the ability to renew provisional licenses as those requirements have been elevated. I think that requirement starts on July 1st of 2023, where it changes the provisional, the requirements to qualify for a renewed provisional license. But I would love to hear if there's any other recommendations from members, committee members specifically. All right, well, assuming that I'm still connected on Wi-Fi and I don't see any hands and I don't hear anyone or have noticed anyone unmuting, perhaps we should go. Member Woolsey, yes.
We hear you.
Okay.
We're still on.
Great. Perhaps we should go to public comment on this item.
Okay, we will open the floor up for public comment on agenda item number 6. So if you'd like to make a comment, please raise your hand by clicking the hand icon if you've logged onto the meeting, or by pressing *3 if you've called in. You'll have 2 minutes to speak with a 30-second warning, and when your time is up, you will be muted and we will move on to the next comment. The floor is open. Does anyone have any comments on future agenda items for the committee? Great. Lynn Silver, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Hello again. Yes, I'd like to ask for 2 areas of feedback to the committee. The first is to request a report from DCC regarding the status of enforcement against products attractive to children or easily confused with non-cannabis foods or beverage, and committee discussion. Our own research has identified a very significant number of illegal market products which are violating these fundamental precepts of Prop 64. And we'd like to understand better what's happening with that and how that can be strengthened. We'd also like to understand what is happening with the enforcement of the September provisions on restrictions on flavor additives to inhaled products, which is very important for the protection of our adolescent population, as we saw with the epidemic of teenage smoking from Juul, for example. So we would suggest those 2 items. Thank you.
Thank you. Adrian Keys, I've just sent you a request to unmute.
Agenda item. I would like to suggest the possibility of an agenda item that would create a technical advisory group that would allow information to be gathered from the cannabis industry relative to the high cannabinoid study and research that wouldn't allow for industry participation otherwise. I think it's a real clean mechanism, and it allows for the commission itself to get the information that may not otherwise be at hand. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, members of the public, last call for comment on agenda item number 6, which is future agenda items. Raise your hand if you have any input. Vice Chair Nevedal, it looks like we have come to the end of that portion of public comment.
Okay, thank you very much. I think we can close public comment on item number 6. And with that, I think that concludes our meeting for today, and we can go ahead and adjourn today's Cannabis Advisory Committee meeting. Thank you all, members and staff, for participating and facilitating, and members of the public for joining us.
Thank you. Take care.